Now what I'm going to talk, I'm going to shift tack a little bit, and I'm going to talk about a project that was done by a dietetic student at the University of Auckland who I supervise. So I want to start by acknowledging Tessa Bollard, who did this really interesting project as part of a 90-point thesis as part of her Masters in Dietetics. And also Dr. Nina Mobach, who used to work here at the University of Otago in Wellington, but is now studying medicine in Australia. But she provided a lot of support for Tessa with the study design and the analysis. And my colleague Natalie Walker, who actually works in the area of tobacco research and smoking cessation, so provided a lot of expertise in that area too. So I'm not going to dwell on why we did the research. We've heard a great deal this morning about the association of sugar-sweetened beverages with a whole range of adverse health outcomes. But my personal interest as a science is not so much in describing the problem, but thinking about what's the solution and what can we do to actually improve the situation that we're in. So with that in mind, we know that we have issues with obesity and diet-related disease in New Zealand and many other countries around the world. But what do we know about what might actually be effective to tackle these issues? Well, there was an obesity series in The Lancet, the first one that was published in 2011, which was led by Boyd Swinburne and colleagues. And one of the papers in that looked at what are the most cost-effective interventions to reduce obesity. And you can see there that the top two most cost-effective interventions that they identified were a 10% tax on unhealthy foods and drinks and front-of-pack traffic light labelling on unhealthy foods. So that provides some indication in terms of where we might want to go, and obviously a lot of background to some of what we're discussing today. But tobacco research also provides some really interesting data around what kinds of interventions are likely to be effective to change people's behaviour. And we also know from tobacco research that taxes are one of the most effective interventions. Every time tax levels go up, an increasing number of people quit smoking. And that effect is actually greater amongst young people than it is amongst older groups in the population. Tobacco research has also shown us that warning labels are an effective intervention, and more recently in Australia and being discussed in New Zealand, there has been a lot of debate around plain packaging, so removing the branding on cigarettes, and data from Australia suggests that that's also a very effective intervention. So alongside that, we knew that warning labels were effective in tobacco research, but up until very recently, it's not something that's really been, it's not an idea that's really been floated much around food and drinks. But just last year, San Francisco implemented legislation which now requires that the advertising for all beverages with added sugar has to carry this warning label. So we are starting to see increasing interest in the potential application of warning labels to sugary drinks too. So that's really the background to the research that Tessa decided to do. So she set out to assess the effects of plain packaging, warning labels, and as a comparator, a 20% tax on the sugar-sweetened, the express preferences around sugar-sweetened beverages and their purchase probabilities for young people in New Zealand. And this is the pictures that you can see here illustrate the kind of interventions that we showed our participants who took part in the study. The study was done by anonymous online survey, so we recruited just over 600 New Zealanders who are aged between 13 and 24 who said that they consumed soft drinks regularly. And what we did was we randomly allocated them to view one of 12 experimental conditions, specifically one of 12 images. And those 12 images were either a branded soft drink, the same soft drink but with plain packaging, and then for each of those the additional options were that they either had no warning label on them, they had a text-only warning label similar to the one that's been brought in San Francisco, or a graphic warning label which is more similar to the kind of picture warning labels that you have on tobacco or on tobacco products. and for all of those, with or without a 20% tax. So 12 scenarios, people were randomly allocated to see the images, and they answered questions around their perceptions of the drink, what they thought of people who might consume the drink, which is something that's really important for young people, and how likely they would be to buy the drink depending on the one that they were allocated. So I'll tell you a little bit about our study participants. As I said, they were young people, so an average age of 18, approximately equal numbers of men and women, and kind of a slightly lower proportion of Māori and Pacifica participants than we have in the general New Zealand population, which probably reflects the fact that the recruitment was done through the market research panel. So it probably reflects the demographics of the market research panel. And you can see here that there was a whole range of frequency of sugar sweetened beverage consumption from less than once a month to twice or more each day. What did we find? I'll show you a bit more graphically, but just to summarise, all three of the scenarios, so the tax, the warning label and plain packaging, had statistically significant negative effects on young people's preferences for the drinks that they were shown. Plain packaging had the most significant negative impact, followed by warning labels. And of the warning labels, the graphic warning labels had a more significant effect than the text-only warning label. And of the three interventions, plain packaging and warning labels also had a significant effect on their reported likelihood of purchasing the drink. So we asked them, if you're in a situation where in a dairy or a convenience store where you're about to buy a sugary drink and this was one of the options available, how likely would you be to purchase it? And they rated it on a Likert scale of 1 to 7. And we found that plain packaging and warning labels had significant negative effects on their likelihood to purchase those drinks. Interestingly, the 20% tax didn't have a statistically significant effect on their express purchases, which obviously is counterintuitive in terms of tobacco research and a lot of the emerging research around natural experiments, but it may reflect the fact that this was an online experiment and people weren't actually purchasing the drink, so that the price was a less salient factor than it would be in real life. So this is their express likelihood to buy a sugary drink by experimental conditions. So you can see that there's quite a clear difference between branded packaging and plain packaging. Also significant differences between no warning label and the text only or the graphic warning label, but smaller differences between no tax and tax. I'm a scientist, so I'm always painfully aware of the limitations of all of the research that I do. And it was a small student research project, so it did have some limitations. As I've mentioned, these were hypothetical scenarios. People weren't actually purchasing the drinks. And our study sample weren't representative of the whole New Zealand population. The text-only warning label did have some graphic elements. We modelled it on the label that's being implemented in Chile as a warning label, and it's an orange kind of stop sign. So that may have kind of had a slightly graphic element to it, which may have influenced its impact. Obviously it would be really useful to do more research in this area to confirm and extend the work. We see a lot of potential to do more work in this area. But what can we take from it, allowing for those limitations? It would seem that plain packaging and warning labels could significantly reduce young people's preferences for and their likelihood to buy sugary drinks, and might therefore reduce their overall consumption. And we've talked a lot about a comprehensive portfolio of measures and how that's what's really needed if we're going to significantly reduce consumption of sugary drinks. And we believe that these labelling measures should be considered as part of that kind of portfolio. Louise put up a picture of our paper earlier today, Louise. But you may have, it was published just at the beginning of September. And it had massive uptake in the media. for a small student project, we were surprised at how much uptake it had. So the figure that you can see there, the 85, is called an altmetric score, and it's basically a measure of the attention score that a published paper receives. And you can see that our paper is in the top 5% of all research outputs that are scored by altmetric, which is pretty amazing in such a short space of time. But we were also really interested to see all of the debate and the discussion that went on in the media when the paper was published, and subsequent to that as well, a lot of debate on Twitter and so on. So it's really good to see that the issue is being, or the interventions are being socialised and discussed and considered. So I'll leave it there. My contact details are there if you'd like to get in touch with me for any more details, or if you've got any questions. Thank you.